Welcome to the Oh Brother podcast from your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith.
I'm not usually alongside you. You say that, but I'm not.
It's the Oh Brother Travel Edition. We are in the same space for the first time.
In my studio.
In your studio, the physical media studio. For those of you that are watching and not listening, or listening and not watching, rather, it's the Omicron variant.
Yeah, there's a new variant. It's very dangerous.
And typically, we're not in the same space. We're trying to be COVID safe and practice.
Didn't you get vaccinated?
Yeah, but I haven't been boosted yet.
I haven't been boosted yet.
Okay.
Screw it.
All right. The hell with it.
A little COVID.
So, welcome to the Oh Brother podcast. I don't know what date it is. It's December 3rd.
Is it December 3rd?
December 3rd, you get this episode.
We actually technically had a week off because last week's show was
our Thanksgiving.
Was the
interview highlights.
And thank you to Emily.
Yes.
For putting that together, which she did a great job on.
Fantastic job. Yeah.
And thank you to all the people who have agreed to be interviewed. Hopefully, we'll have more this year.
Yeah, it's what are we coming at you with a review of the Beatles documentary Get Back, which is on Disney Plus right now.
Yes, we spent the last 3 days
literally
watching this 7+ hours, and it's fantastic. It's just, we couldn't even fake getting into it, or right. Usually when we do a movie, we don't talk about it. We purposely keep our opinions to ourselves. But while we were watching this, we had to comment back and forth. Right. That's how good it is.
So set it up, right? As it does in the beginning because it's a 3-part documentary.
Yes. This was going to be a movie.
Yeah.
And I think it was going to be released in theaters. And I think Bob Iger swung in because there's a big thank you to him at the end of it. It's like bigger than any other thank you.
Right. And
he came in and Peter Jackson realized he had so much footage, he couldn't get it into a movie. Peter Jackson's known for having 3-hour, 4-hour movies.
Right.
So we broke it up into 3 parts. And basically it starts off they've decided they haven't toured in a couple of years. They haven't been together. They haven't recorded anything in a couple of years. So it starts out, they decide they're going to record an album and then do a TV show at the end of 14 days. Was it originally 14 days?
Yeah.
And then at the end of that 14 days, they would do a live show and you would see the music that they created in those 2 weeks. Is that about right?
Yeah. And there was that live performance some people may have seen where it was like a New Year's Eve broadcast or something where they had
people on the stage.
Right. And from that experience, it kind of got their juices flowing again of wanting to do something.
Right.
And then it led to this.
As you said. For people who have seen this, which is Ron Howard's 8 Days a Week.
Yeah, and I haven't even seen this.
The touring edition, which is fantastic. I thought, I'm never going to see another documentary this good with the Beatles. It's fantastic. Believe it or not, I'm sorry, Ron Howard, I love this, but this tops it.
Yeah. And like you said, we were struck within the first 10, 15 minutes. There's so much to say about it. The quality of this footage is phenomenal. And I'm not sure, did you read up on whether or not Peter Jackson had to?
All I know is it says it's in 4D.
4K.
4D. That's
new. Yeah. You don't even know.
This is 4D. We didn't do the intro with how they're going to, how did they even find us?
Before we promote the Beatles any further,
for
those of you that are not currently following, because the whole thing's throwing us off.
It is.
In the same space.
It's odd.
Right. I feel like we're doing, the Sunday Night Football broadcast. Yeah. Al Michaels over here.
Exactly.
But for those of you that are not currently following us, make sure that you do. And the easiest way to find all things Oh Brothers to go out to our official website, which is B as in brother,
We can really clink them.
podcast.com. That's ohbpodcast.com. And there you can get access to all things Oh Brother. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our videos out there, like this one, and get access to our blog, which by the time this airs, you probably have a new blog out at that point,
working
right?
on one right now.
Yeah, it's in the works right now. So that's where you can find all of the Oh Brother goings on. All right, so back to Get Back. Let's get back to Get Back.
Yeah.
And we were joking too. We were going to call this the Lord of the Ringos. Peter Jackson, which that's one of the things we said. Now, again, there's so much going on here. One of the things that's striking, and I said this to you, which is it seems to be less about the music and more about the dynamics of the relationships and all the things that are going on. And we were both struck by, the spotlight on the relationship and interchange between like Paul and Ringo.
Correct.
And George and Paul. And, I think we thought there would be a lot of the John and Paul stuff going on.
But George became a major part of this.
So talk about that piece and how we get to that, because that's where I think we first were like
blown off,
sort of stunned. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, literally.
Spoiler alert.
If you are wanting to listen to Beatles songs and think, oh, this is going to be, you might be frustrated with this because, they play the same song over and over. They're still writing it. Mm-hmm. They're trying to figure out words to get back and Let It Be, all these famous Beatles songs that we all know.
Don't Let Me Down.
Yeah. And that's fascinating to watch. But what's more fascinating is the dynamic, the social dynamic between the four of them. Mm-hmm. And how we always thought it was compared to here it is.
Right.
And there's a spot in the documentary where George is very frustrated and he's talking to Paul and and Paul is kind of apologizing to him saying, I'm sorry to keep telling you to do it my way, but if I don't, it won't quite be right. And George says, well, we always do it your way. And then John pipes in and says, yeah, he's right. You always tell me how to do it and I do it. And Paul's kind of a little blown away by it. Mm-hmm. But while that's going on, you can just see George just kind of soothing, getting madder, more frustrated. And as he packs his stuff, a note comes up from his personal diary that says, today, quit the Beatles.
Right.
And as we were watching this take place before he said he quit, I said to Dan, this is the breakup of the Beatles we're watching right in front of us.
Right. And I think, we had commented on the fact that, being in the shadow maybe of John and Paul too is maybe getting to them the way that they were interacting with each other and kind of taking over the whole production.
Yeah.
And I think George was looking for an opportunity to express himself, which comes up more strongly in the third part.
Yes.
Where he literally talks about like this desire to go off and start recording his own.
Right.
Like an album of his own songs.
He has this whole bunch of songs that, and in the documentary, you see him start to do one of his songs.
It was one of your favorites in the documentary.
It's the one that got stuck in my head.
I mean, mine.
Yeah. And he's starting to do it. And very subtly, they squeeze him out and start working on a Lennon-McCartney song.
Right.
And, all the Lennon-McCartney songs, I'm starting to think, how many of them were Lennon-McCartney and not just McCartney?
Yeah. And here's another thing too, was you could see Paul he was the organized one. He was all business. Mm-hmm. And he didn't really have a lot of time. Well, that's not true. I was going to say he didn't have a lot of time for shenanigans, but that's not true because there's plenty of right. And maybe talk a little bit about that's a good segue into the Brian Epstein piece.
Yeah. Because
of the discipline.
Yeah. Like in the touring years, Brian Epstein was with them and he was like a father figure to them. We see them at 18 years old in this documentary. And they're told how to dress, what time to be there, or they're given clothes. Here's your boots, here's your thing, be here at 10. We're going to write the song, be done by 12. Then we're going to record it. We'll be done at 3. We record it. We test it. We go home. So that kind of structure is gone. And
Right.
Paul is craving it.
Because Brian Epstein ends up, he dies.
He dies at 32,
32.
which I did not realize that.
That's shocking.
I thought he was with them the whole time. And you find out, they were with each other as younger individuals, much longer than the actual Beatles, the famous, wild, crazy times of the Beatles.
Right.
But, behind me, I have some of the best documentaries you'll ever want to see. Hoop Dreams, Crumb, Bowling for Columbine, Thin Blue Line by Errol Morris, Stop Making Sense. Over here is Apocalypse Now, which not Apocalypse Now, but there's a documentary, Hearts of Darkness, which is about the making of Apocalypse Now, which is even better than the movie.
And that's something about Get Back. It's a documentary of a documentary of a documentary. But the footage is there's one scene, again, another spoiler alert, where this was one of the most fascinating things, where George leaves and that whole thing is going on, and they're trying to coax him back into the production.
They're trying to figure out what to do.
Right. But there's a segment where Paul and John go off and have a private conversation, what they think is a private conversation, in a lunchroom somewhere in this Twickenham location where they're originally filming and recording. And the director or the producers put a hidden microphone in a flower pot or something on the table and captured the whole conversation on tape. It was unreal to listen to.
So you're hearing Paul and John, this very private conversation that they think nobody in the world is listening.
Right.
And here we are listening to it 52 years later. And my question was, how did this stay hidden for 52 years? Now, it comes up at the beginning and tells you how many hours of footage Peter Jackson went through.
It was
right?
It's over
like 500.
Oh, was it that? I thought it was over 57 hours.
I thought it was more than
felt
that.
like 500.
Yeah, no, I thought it was,
sure the
it was
editor
tons of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know how this wound up under the Disney umbrella. It must have been Bob Iger who that's his thing. He's retiring. That's his legacy to Disney, is acquiring things. He acquired Marvel. He acquired Lucas. I mean, but to acquire the Beatles stuff, it's fascinating. I think for us, given the way we were educated, especially in college, you being a sociologist, me being a psychiatrist or psychology.
Need a psychiatrist.
I use one.
Right.
And from that standpoint, that's how I was watching this whole thing, through that lens, through the lens of leadership, which I have a degree in, and in the legalities. Like, it's fascinating. Most people, well, I don't know if people know this, that Paul does not own, the Beatles never owned their own music. And there's a scene in this, talk about that scene where the guy is talking to Paul about owning the rights to the music.
Oh yeah. He's, I don't remember the guy's name.
I don't know who it was,
but he's basically saying how there's all this money
to be made
and cheap music
and
publishing.
Paul is kind of going like,
and he's he couldn't be less interested.
He's more focused on the lyrics for the next song.
Right.
Come to find out, those lyrics wind up getting bought by Michael Jackson. And in a very famous recording, they did a studio record together, Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney.
Right.
He thought, this is I'm going to get my music. And he asked Michael Jackson if, they could make a deal, and he said no.
Yeah.
And that kind of ended that friendship pretty quick.
Right. Right. And again, going back to like, I was most riveted, I think, by watching Paul throughout this whole thing. And he was such a taskmaster and really, the one that was trying to mitigate some of the chaos that was going on at times. Although again, he was partaking in that just as much as the others, with the absence of Epstein or that father figure in the mix.
Correct.
Sometimes they would just be riffing and
dancing
doing these
around,
like loose jams for like on and wasting all this tape and session time and
and it was interesting. You could see like they would show up at different times.
Right.
Somebody would come at 11, somebody would come at noon, somebody would come at 1. There was no structure. And even the guy doing the documentary couldn't really bring them, you know what I mean? He couldn't control them.
Right.
And at one point, they made it clear to him that they were not in control of the four of them, because Paul makes the statement right to him. The only ones in this room that have any say are the four of us.
That's right. He
does fascinating.
Say that. Yeah, he does say that. And it's also really amazing to see some of the performances you're watching are some of the performances that end up on the album Let It Be.
Yes.
Many of them
last
actually.
album.
Yeah. And so there's also, we haven't talked about the Yoko Ono, influence here, which anybody that's followed the Beatles knows that story, but
right.
She's pretty prominent in this because she's there beside John constantly.
I can't think of one day. I mean, we see 3 weeks in their lives.
Yeah.
And I don't see one day. And sometimes John wouldn't show up and they'd call, he's in bed with Yoko.
Right. Right. And Linda was there.
Paul, Linda Eastman at the
Paul's
time.
Wife. No affiliation with Kodak Eastman.
Yes, we
discovered. Yeah.
But yes, and she looks really so young in it, yet she's older than Paul.
She's 28 at this point.
So it was fascinating, but she stayed out of things.
Yeah. And the Yoko thing, though, what was interesting about that is because people have their own views and opinions about that whole thing, and as it relates to the Beatles and their breakup and whatever. But Paul is a very interesting, again, another scene where he's talking about their relationship and basically saying, look, they love each other.
What are we going to do?
Who are we to come in between that or say anything or comment about it? Like, he was you see there's much more of an acceptance of it, or at least it seems to be, than has been portrayed, at least from my view over the years in the media.
And even later in the end, towards the end, they talk about that. They say we're not, they were like 4 brothers, that slept in the same room every night. And that's all they could do was write songs, and Paul and John were just always together. Well, they're not together anymore. They have girlfriends, they have wives, they have significant others in their life. But Yoko is always glued to John's side.
Yeah.
And part of the frustration that George has,
that's what I was going to bring up,
was because I think he was taking a break, and Yoko took over his microphone spot, starts kind of screeching,
and was sitting on his amp.
And
they made a big to-do about that, but Paul kind of jokes about it later in a way, almost, where he says, the story 50 years from now, remember he says, which was kind of mind-blowing because it basically is, that'll be the story. The headline is the Beatles broke up because Yoko sat on an amp.
Yes. I think, and Paul said right into, everybody that was standing there, because they're waiting for John. And he said, if we tell John, hey, it's either Yoko or us, it's Yoko. He said it clear. I mean, and that you can see that. There's another one more thing about Yoko. There's another fascinating scene where Yoko finds out her divorce was finalized.
Yeah.
And and they're in the middle of rehearsing a song, and she starts kissing and they're kind of making out. And all of a sudden, the song, John yells into the mic, Yoko's divorce is finalized, free at last, free at last.
That's right.
I mean, it's just fascinating to watch them.
Yeah,
they're 28 years old, roughly, all of them.
Right.
George was the youngest.
This is another thing we talked about, but I had a much different, it gave me a much different perspective about Ringo. It's kind of always been sort of not the joke of the Beatles, but, the lesser.
Right.
I don't know. That's
he was kind of like the cute kid for the girls. And they all liked Ringo. But
right. But he really sort of seemed to be, in a lot of ways, the backbone of the group. He was there every day.
Yeah.
He was usually the first one there.
Yep.
And, you could see how encouraging he was and how enamored he was with Paul.
He was fascinated with Paul.
Just watching him write and, create. And
kind of like we would be if we were sitting there watching Paul McCartney create a song.
Yeah, he was a fan.
That's how Ringo is.
Yeah. Now, this culminates in this, for most people have seen this famous Rooftop performance, which ends up being on the top of their recording studio at Apple Studios.
Right. I explained at the beginning that they were going to do a TV show at the end of this, what was originally 2 weeks. And then they delayed it a few days, and then they delayed it a day. And then they said, you know what, this TV show thing is stupid. George didn't want to do it. Ringo just wanted to do a concert. Ringo, the creator of the documentary, kept wanting them to do a live show somewhere
like in Africa
with candlelight and just see who shows up. And that was the plan. And none of them liked it. Ringo said, we're not leaving the country.
He definitely didn't
going anywhere.
Right.
And then George was, and Paul said, look, we all have a vote. And if it isn't 4-0, we're not doing it. And the whole thing is just, we get towards the end and it's about to go down the tubes. They're almost this close to agreeing to just make an album like they always do. And send out the album and that's it. And then we see two guys whispering to McCartney. McCartney's the one most frustrated. He wants this to be something. The other three don't care,
right?
Frankly, they're happy recording the 14 songs. That was their goal. 14 songs. Let's record 14 songs, release it. We're done. But Paul's like, if we do that, it's just same old thing,
right?
Isn't it?
It's just a documentary of the Beatles making their next album,
right? Which the guy's like, this documentary has got to get going. And both John and Paul are like, are you kidding? The documentary's great.
Right.
That's not a problem, But in the end, we see Paul pushed aside and the sound guy, Glenn and the director are in his ear. And all of a sudden, you see kind of this big Grinch smile come over his face like, yeah, that's it. And that leads to the Rooftop.
Right. And I was familiar with the performance of Don't Let Me Down on the Rooftop for years, because it was a video.
Right.
And so I knew it very well. So for this to be, the payoff for this whole documentary was wild to know this was all preceded that. It made it that much more fascinating to experience.
At the end of each segment, there's a jaw-dropping moment, and we won't give them away, but you invest a lot of time in this. You're talking 3 hours at a whack, the first 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
And then the third one says 2:14, something like that. But it can be exhausting at times when they're going through their process, which is just kind of,
especially when they're just riffing and
doing crazy things.
Yeah. And we didn't talk about Billy Preston for a minute.
Yeah, Billy Preston, who famously played with them on the Rooftop.
They befriended him when they were touring in the early 60s, and he was backing Little Richard.
Correct.
As you discover, yeah.
And he shows up one day. So does Peter Sellers.
Right.
Which when they're at the beginning of it, and they're all frustrated. Peter Sellers shows up and he sits down and he's like, so what are you guys doing? And they're like, this. And he's like, okay, I gotta
go.
leave.
That was weird. Yeah.
It was odd. So then
Billy Preston's in town to shoot a commercial.
Right. And he stops by. He knows the four guys from the road.
And they had been talking about the need
for a piano.
To have another person so they could have a piano and not give up both guitars.
Right.
You know, George and John.
Because the goal is at the end of this, we're not going to dub anything. We're not going to use, 4 tracks, 8 tracks. We're going to just play it live. Mm-hmm. That's the goal. So they're like, well, if I play piano, that we lose a guitar. Mm-hmm. So Billy Preston shows up just to say hi. He sits down and they say, hey, Billy, why don't you sit down, play with us? And they start playing.
And he never left.
Yeah. And that's fascinating.
And he adds so much flavor to it on some of those tunes.
Yeah.
He some of the things they were struggling to find.
Yeah.
He figured out like nothing.
And it's amazing to see somebody with such talent like him sit down, because they were like, well, let's give him the recordings we've done.
Right.
He can listen to them, he'll learn them, and then he'll come back. And George says, let's just play him, and he'll,
figure it out.
Playing. He instantly, it's like he knew it.
Yeah.
Intuitively, what was coming next.
Yeah.
And some of the most classic riffs that you hear in the piano and Let It Be, we see them being created. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and you're struck by that with all of them, really, because I think they all play every instrument there is.
It's unbelievable. They all play drums. They all can play the bass guitar,
keyboards. Yeah,
they all mess around. You see at the end or towards the end, you see Ringo kind of trying to get a song in.
Yeah. Octopus's Garden.
Exactly, which he later records.
Sure.
And he's playing the piano next to Paul at one point.
What's your take on Ringo as a drummer?
Yeah.
What's your take on Ringo in this after watching this?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as a drummer, when I used to play, and that was my profession, I was a drummer for a number of years. That's all I did. And made good money at the time. My friends were all going to college. I'm like, I don't need college. I got all the money. They got nothing. So as a drummer, you're always jealous. You can't appreciate when you're in it.
Yeah.
Other drummers, especially when you get good and people are telling you you're really good and you start believing what they're telling you. Mm-hmm. So, we as drummers, we always kind of pushed Ringo off as a joke. He's not that good.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've said that.
Yeah, I have said that.
Yeah.
I used to say that. Mm-hmm. But as I matured, as I stopped drumming, when I gave it up in Florida, I started to appreciate other drummers and was like, wow, look at what I couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And I feel that way with Ringo now. I see some of the things that he was able to do with very little. Mm-hmm. Everybody that knows him, simple trap set is what they call it. And I don't know. I had a greater appreciation, even more so.
Well, I was wondering that if that was a lot of his skill, was the fact that he was maybe more technically capable, but he played what seemed to be a very simplistic style.
And I'm
not sure how easy that is, but
right. It's kind of like Max Weinberg with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I always thought, geez, Max Weinberg's just a metronome. He just plays the time. You never see a big drum solo from him.
Right.
You never see Ringo do this big drum solo. In fact,
like Neil Peart,
Rush solo, exactly. But the biggest drum solo ever the Beatles recorded, it was Paul that played it. Right. So, but you realize afterwards, it's not about that. It's about timing and syncopation and setting that base for everybody else to cling on to. Mm-hmm. And so I went through the same thing with Max Weinberg, and then to see him take over with Conan O'Brien. And to realize how gifted a musician he was, that blew me away.
Yeah.
And he did things I could never do.
Yeah. The only thing with this, I wasn't a huge fan of the way it ended. I don't know about you. It sort of just, to me, it kind of trailed off at the end with it didn't feel like a real satisfying conclusion to it. I almost feel like, I don't know, they could have ended it maybe just 5 minutes sooner. It just, I don't know. There
was a trail off because we were getting, in the third part, we were getting a lot of the junk.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't really want to belittle that because I think that was part of the process that got them to the songs. They had to do that to kind of get into a groove.
Yeah.
But
because you mentioned there was these jaw-dropping moments, particularly at the end of the first and second parts.
Correct.
And I was
didn't end that
way.
For
the third, and
it was just kind of a scroll. I'm not even going to say what it says, but if there's a scroll, and then it was over. I felt a little bit. We had invested 7 hours of our time into this, and it was fantastic to watch that rooftop thing happen in real time.
Yeah,
but there wasn't anything after that, really.
No.
But scroll.
That said, absolutely check this out. On Disney Plus.
If you have Disney Plus, you got to watch this, and not just for the music. There's fascinating things. We both teach as well, and every course I've ever taught, I could use this documentary and teach points from communication and leadership and things
interpersonal community.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So you got to check this one out. It's definitely worth it, whether you're a Beatles fan or not. It's just it's an incredible document. And thoroughly enjoyed it. I know you've got a video pick.
I do. And this, I cannot give this a higher recommendation. If you already have Citizen Kane right now, and as you see this, the sale at Barnes and Noble is over. I can't believe I didn't mention the sale sooner, in the month. But twice a year, Barnes and Noble has Criterion discs half price.
Yeah.
And this is a 4K. This is one of their first 4K discs. And it happens to be, in my opinion, the best movie ever made. And it's so brilliant in 4K. It's almost like watching it for the first time.
Now, did you watch the whole thing?
I did.
Okay.
I watched it after the 3 hours of Beatles, but because I was just going to watch it to see what it looked like. And I was just riveted.
I was like, what are you going to watch that for?
Yeah.
Just watch,
You were like, go to bed.
Yeah.
Go to bed
in the morning.
I know. And I wound up all night watching it. It's that good. And the amount of extras on this, there's 3 commentaries. Roger Ebert does one. People that were close to Orson Welles do. It's fascinating. Cannot recommend it higher.
And then I have.
You have.
Yeah, I actually do have one because I had it handy, and it's physical media, which
That's right.
Although this does have a digital code in it.
But you already have this digitally, don't you?
I
think you do.
Yes, I do. I think I do. But this is the anniversary edition of Beauty and the Beast, which we just passed. Is it 30 years?
30 years.
30 years, which is hard to believe. But the awesome thing about this is that artwork is by Paige O'Hara, who is the original voice of Belle. And as I've talked about on the show before, I've met her several times, hoping to get to meet her again in the not too distant future, depending on what happens with this whole pandemic deal. But so I would recommend this. It's an awesome looking set. That cover is just, look at that.
You actually have the steel book
yes.
that she did the artwork for.
And this has all kinds of extras on it as well.
Yeah.
There's 3 versions of the film alone.
Yeah.
On this set. So this would be my recommendation. This time of year that kind of fits too,
And you also own artwork of hers.
Yes, which you can see in my old studio. If you go back and look at some of our older videos, you'll see it there. And she signs it like her right here. You can see Paige O'Hara right there. So
hopefully
that's
you'll have
pick.
another Paige O'Hara.
I'm hoping to have it personally signed. Yeah. All right. Anything else about Get Back before we wrap this travel edition up?
It's been exhausting. You've spent basically your whole time here.
Yeah, more time than I wanted.
Boston, watching TV, which we didn't expect that to be the case, but it was, I think, well worth it.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping to spend some time with Mom, but 7 hours of Beatles, time with Mother, priceless.
We got to do another old Mother one of these days.
We do. We have to do another Mother. Well, all right. Again, for those of you that aren't currently following us, make sure that you do. And the easiest way to find all things Oh Brother is to go out to our official website, which is OHB as in brother podcast.com. That's OHBpodcast.com. And you'll get access to all things Oh Brother out there. Yeah, this can't recommend this documentary highly enough. Make sure you check this one out. It's definitely fascinating.
Yeah, it was great to sit next to you for a change.
Yeah.
Next time, the last time we were together was before the pandemic. So
that's right.
So in a couple of years, we're in year 4, will be the next time we do one.
I'll see you in 2025. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Oh Brother podcast. I've been your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, literally, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith. And we will see you next time.